So we're going to be talking about the halachos of Harchakos today. Now that we know when somebody's married, as we're getting ready for marriage, we know that part of the process is Hilchos Nida. Hilchos Nida means that there are certain times of the month when your wife is a Nida and certain times when she's not. It's just like Shabbos and weekday. You have a time when it's Shabbos, you have a time when it's not Shabbos, and even though you're in the same apartment, you're in the same situation, you have the same people around you, the same items, the same objects, there's a difference between how you interact with those things on Shabbos versus the way it is during the week. You have muktzah, you have malacha, other kinds of things like that. So at first it might seem a little overwhelming, a little daunting to think about the vast ideas of Hilchos Shabbos, and it may seem overwhelming to try to remember how you're going to know how to interact with every little thing, but soon it becomes something you get used to and almost automatic. Like on Shabbos, you automatically don't turn on the switch. After Shabbos, you automatically do turn it on. And so the halachos of Harchakos means learning about what the interactions are like and what is allowed, what's not allowed during the time when husband and wife are married, but she is a nida. And so at first, at this point, as we're going to begin to introduce the background of the halachos and the halachos themselves, it may seem overwhelming. It may seem like a lot of information. This is obviously very, very important, not just for the wife, but also for the husband, for the chassan to really know how to behave and how to interact. But we don't want to get overwhelmed right now. So we want to know that although we're going to cover a lot of information, we want to know that over time, as you learn about it, you'll do chazara, you'll become more clear, and you'll also learn how to implement it in practice. So let's talk a little bit about the background of the halachos of Harchakos. So when a woman is a nida, so being a nida is something that the Torah talks about. And the Torah says that when a woman is a nida, being intimate is obviously forbidden. It's asur min haTorah. It's a iser kares. So in addition to that, there's also other kinds of negia, chibuk, v'nishuk, a hug, a kiss, other kinds of affectionate touch, which is a machlekes rishonim, Rambam, Ramban. The halacha is in Shulchan Aruch, we follow the Rambam, that any kind of affectionate touch is forbidden. The Shach says that if there's chiba involved, then it's for sure an isur min haTorah. If there's no chiba, if it's not something that's enjoyable necessarily, touch is still not allowed. So the concept of shomer negia, which means the idea of making sure that when a woman is a nida, that you're not touching each other at all, is something that is mostly min haTorah, if not midirabanan. Midirabanan is not a joking matter either, obviously, very, very serious. So this is not anything that is added to the situation. Already, the very fact that a woman is a nida already means that min haTorah, not allowed to be intimate together, not allowed to touch each other in an intimate way, and they can't touch each other already, even if it's not intimate. But what happens is, when you're married, there's additional harchakos that are added by the chachamim, midrabanan, that are added, specifically between a husband and wife who are married. Meaning, for example, now, chassan and kala, before you get married, some of these harchakos do not apply. Or between a man and another woman that you're not married to, also the harchakos don't apply. They apply only specifically between a husband and a wife. It's almost like we're being more strict. So why would that be? Why would we be more strict between a husband and a wife when you're married? And so there are different layers to the answer, but the main answer is the idea of yichud. Typically speaking, we have a certain protection, I guess you could say, in place, or boundary or barrier, which that is iser yichud, and it would be a good idea, if you haven't recently reviewed the halachos of yichud, to go over those halachos clearly, because it's relevant in many different situations, especially chassan and kala, if you're going out, or in general, a taxi, elevator, at night, different situations. But the halachos of yichud basically say that a man and a woman who are not allowed to be intimate together should never be alone, never be in a situation where the door is locked or people aren't going to be around. And so that yichud basically makes the safety and the protection that nothing's going to happen. But when a husband and wife are married, we're not going to say that every month for 2 weeks If she's not pregnant, let's say, then it can happen that it's half of the time that she's in Nida, half of the time that she's not. We're not going to say that half of the time not allowed to be alone together. And there's also a good reason why you're allowed to be alone together. It's because, unlike with any other Isurim, this is someone that you've already been with and you're going to be with again. It's like the idea of Pas B'Saleh, that the difference between the temptation to do something that you're not allowed to do is, in this case, not allowed to do it now, but you can wait a little bit. So therefore, they allowed yichud. Yichud is permitted. But since yichud is permitted, we don't have that safety net, so to speak. So therefore, what we do is we add the harchakos. The harchakos are extra boundaries. So another way to say that is, you can see here on the slide, the difference between a yichud with a nida that is your wife versus that's not. The reasons why yichud is permitted is because you've been together and you're going to be together again, and therefore harchakos specifically do apply. Chachamim saw a need for more restrictions than what applies by other forbidden relatives. So on a basic level, what we're saying is that the harchakos are simply taking a few steps away. Maybe you could say that the harchakos are not about creating social distancing, space between the husband and the wife, that they should be far away from each other, but rather that the two of them together are taking steps away from the things that we're not supposed to be doing, the things that don't apply here in this situation. There are certain things we're not allowed to do, not allowed to be intimate, not allowed to have any kind of intimate touch or touching, and even hear her, even thinking about intimacy or the desire for intimacy is something that's not appropriate at this time. So therefore, we take a few steps away and we say, don't do anything else that could lead to the things that you're not supposed to do. It's kind of like what the Gemara says about a Nazir, that we tell them to take a few steps away. Don't even go close to a kerem. If you're on a diet, don't stock your freezer with ice cream. Right, so just to give a little mashal, I guess you could say. Let's say you have somebody who goes with his chaverim. They go every month or so. They come together and they go to the pizza shop and they have pizza together and they fabring. And it turns out that he gets a big stomach ache. He's not feeling well, and so the Atzala comes, picks him up, take him to the hospital, do some tests. And they see and they say, you are unfortunately developed some kind of allergy and it's very dangerous for you to eat pizza, so you're not going to be able to have pizza anymore. And he says, oy vey, what should I do? My name is Uncle Moshe, it's my favorite food around, what am I going to do without pizza? He says, listen, but obviously, chayecha koidmin, so he comes back the next time with his friends, and instead of a pizza, he orders a salad or something like that. But it's so overpowering, the smell of the pizza, the look, and he can't stop himself, and he takes a few bites, and he gets more sick than last time. They send him back, and they ask him what happened, and he says, I couldn't stop myself, couldn't control myself. And this keeps happening, time after time after time. He keeps getting into the situation where he promises he's never going to do it again, or he tells his chaverim to give him a slap if he tries, and whatever, makes a neder, makes a shvuah, he promises to give $1,000 to tzedakah. Nothing he could do helps. And he keeps ending up in the situation over and over again where he's sitting there at the table with the pizza in front of him, and he ends up eating it. And he comes to the conclusion, he says, I guess, even though a human being is supposed to have bechira chavshis, I guess I have no bechira when it comes to pizza, and there's nothing I can do. I can't stop myself from eating it, as dangerous as that is, and as much as it's mamish sakanas nefashos. So what's his mistake? What is he not realizing? What he's not realizing is that of course you have bechira. The point of recognizing and realizing this weakness, or recognizing this reality, that he has a certain reaction in a certain situation, is to know how to use your bechira to not get into that situation. Stop walking into the pizza store. He is someone who can't walk into the pizza store. Someone who's truly an alcoholic may not be able to make kiddush on wine or say l'chaim. You can't do that because of the reaction that it will have. In other words, these halachos are based on the fact, on the mitzvahs, that even someone who's sitting here on a chair, kind of far away from a situation, thinks to himself, what would I do in this situation? I'm a from a yid. I'm someone who follows halacha, keeps halachos, and very much the thing that I would never break a rule. I would never go against, I would never violate my principles or my values. Right? But we're human beings. That when we ask not to be put in a place of nisayon, which means theoretically a person can walk through a pizza shop door and get into a situation where the instincts overcome the values. We shouldn't think that we're tzaddikim. We have the ability under all circumstances to always overcome our instincts with our values. So therefore, we learn what those boundaries are, and we take a few steps away, and we don't step over the threshold. That's on a very simple level. Now, once the halachas are set, based on this reason, even someone who is very mitzunan b'tivay, or someone, Moshe Rabbeinu, still has to keep the halachas, even if it's not the actual chashash doesn't apply for him. That's what it's based on. Another interesting thing is that even if today some of the things we're going to be talking about don't seem to resonate, meaning when you hear about it, you would think, why would that be walking into the pizza shop? Why would that be something, why would passing a baby to each other be something that brings to intimacy and brings to more desire for physical connection, which is a little bit sad that it seems like once upon a time it used to be so special and meaningful, and maybe now it's lost a little bit of its charm. It doesn't change the halacha. Halachas are the same. So on a very simple, basic level, ideas of Harchakos are drawing a line for what is that pizza shop? How do we stay out and not get into a situation, and so we can remain clear, and the relationship between the husband and wife can remain appropriate, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. What is the relationship? Not just what it isn't, but what is it? In addition to that, later on we're going to see what the Gemara says about taking a break, how taking a break can bring to more excitement. But besides that, there are additional components. A relationship, shalom bayis, is a very important ingredient in a relationship. A relationship between a husband and a wife is built on trust and bond and connection. And it's very, very important to learn all about the secrets of shalom bayis and how to go about shalom bayis. But shalom bayis, with the bond and the relationship, the yichud, that's something that is very, very important. Now, the physical part, the physically intimate part of the relationship is very, very important, but those are not what create the relationship. Pleasure and bonding in a physical way is not what creates love. It doesn't make love. It's the opposite. There's love and there's bond and there's connection. These are two individuals who are two halves of the same neshama, who've joined forces, who have made a commitment together to build a home together, and to act in ways that bring their closeness and their yichud, the relationship, more and more through acts of shalom bayis and communication and doing things together and connecting emotionally, emotional intimacy. And then within that space and safety and closeness and relationship, then you also have physical intimacy. So in a sense, when you take away the physical part of the relationship, what are you left with? Somebody once called me and said, we don't know what to do. My wife is a nida, and we can't touch each other, and we can't hold hands, we can't hug, we can't do any of those things. So what do we do? It's very awkward. We're both here in our apartment. What do we do together? And that's kind of the point. In a sense, those things are more important. When we take away the physical, what's left is, in a way, the part of the relationship that is sort of more fundamental and more background, especially from the woman's perspective. Does my husband really love me? Does he really care about me? Are we really in this together? Do we really have shalom bayis? And so when you can't touch each other, you can't hug each other, what can you do? When you're able to build up connection and bonding that is appropriate, as we're going to speak about later on during this time, it's even more fundamental to the relationship. So that in addition to the spiritual element, what's mentioned, that how the keeping of the harchakos and keeping of the halacha, how it has an impact on the shalom bayis as well. There's also, in addition to that, a very basic reality as well, and that is on a very, very simple level. When we talk about safety, and I'll speak about it in a very open way. We talk about safety. We talk about, for example, a wife needing to know that her husband is safe. What that means is that even though he's a human being and he has a yetzer hara and he has, maybe other thoughts or other things that come to his mind, but as a Beinani, what does he do practically in his mind and in his actions and his behaviors? That he's someone who sticks to his values. And for example, if he has to interact with women at work or in the shlichus or whatever it is, that he's safe. And he's going to keep those principles, and she can rest assured knowing that he's not going to be looking at things he shouldn't look at online, and he's not going to be interacting inappropriately with other women. I'm just saying on a very simple level, what can enhance that reassurance? That when a husband and wife are spending time together, as much as there's a strong desire or need to want to touch each other, but our choice, the principles are that we follow the halacha. The halacha says not to, the harchakos. By keeping that, as difficult as it might be and maybe even uncomfortable as it might be, in a certain sense, it can actually build trust within the relationship. Also, the very fact that you're in a situation where it's difficult, because you really want to touch each other. And what do you do about the fact that it's so uncomfortable? You don't always have to fix it. Part of a mature relationship and situation is there doesn't always have to be a fix or a solution. It's just we could be together with understanding that this is tough and this is difficult. At the same time, especially during the time of nida, especially if it's a moment where it's becoming difficult, you don't need to always spend the whole time together talking about how hard it is. You want to also make sure that you have a full schedule and lots of other things going on. There's time that you're apart from each other, times that you're together and you're interacting in positive and connecting ways, as we're going to speak about. But so in summary, what we're saying is the whole point of the harchakos are extra chumras, halachos that are added during the time of nida, where we take a few steps away to not do things that could even lead to certain actions that are not allowed now, and even thoughts about those actions. The purpose being, besides that's what the Torah says, the purpose being to distance ourselves from those things, and the additional benefits that come along with that are potentially enhanced connection, shalom bayis, trust and safety and bonding, etc. So these halachas need to be studied well. They're detailed, so study it thoroughly, learn it in chassan classes, go through it in the Sfarim, review it later on, especially after, let's say, pregnancy, when you have 9 months and you don't have to keep the harchakos, and then you're going to have to keep it for a couple of months, 6 to 8 weeks or more after. Make sure to review it, and you can review it together, make sure that you know it really well. And as we spoke about before, it's important to keep these halachas. In general, the poskim say that even though in other areas there are certain kulas or leniencies with regards to a woman becoming a nida, but once she is a nida, when it comes to the harchakos, the minhag is to follow the more strict opinions, generally speaking. We're not supposed to be more machmir than the poskim, but the way the harchakos are presented in our community, as opposed to, let's say, someone who's not really frum, who wants to just keep the basics of Taras HaMishpacha, maybe you present it a little bit differently, but we're going to be learning about the halachas fully and properly, the way they're presented in Sfarim, for example, Tarak Halacha by Rabbi Farkash, which is collected from many, many different poskim, many shittas, and typically is more machmir, following those that are machmir. You'll see that sometimes you have, let's say, a debate among the poskim, and there are certain things where many poskim say it's fine, it's okay, and in situations like that, we'll say that it's better to be machmir, but b'shas hadchak, under certain circumstances, you can be lenient, as we'll see. Being uncomfortable or embarrassed about it is not grounds for leniency, but part of figuring it out and learning how to do it is learning how to do it in a way that's not necessarily embarrassing or uncomfortable. So this is what we were mentioning earlier, that even during the time of harchakos, the couple should display love and respect to each other in permissible manners. We gave a mashal earlier of Shabbos. What is Shabbos? Is Shabbos the day that there's 39 melachos? Is Shabbos the day of don't? Shabbos is the day when you're not allowed to do this and this and this and this. Is that what Shabbos is all about? Or is Shabbos a day when you take away all those things and then you experience Shabbos? What is Shabbos? Shabbos, you can spend many hours learning about what you're not allowed to do. But maybe more, or in addition to that, you really want to learn about what do you do on Shabbos. Shabbos is a time to experience Shabbos, to experiencing the davening and the learning and the family and the connections and whatever Shabbos is all about. So even though we're going to spend a lot of time with the harchakos saying what you're not allowed to do, really, the harchakos also is a time to figure out and develop and be creative and get some hadracha if you need on how to actually connect and bond in ways that are permissible. And like we said earlier, that's in a sense even more important. Okay, so we mentioned generally that we're a little bit more machmir. It's going to be unless we say otherwise, applying equally to husband and wife. And that was the Gemara that mentions the benefits of the Harchakos. I just want to say that there is this idea called Harchakos in public, which is that some people, maybe it's Minhag Beis Harav, some people act as if the wife is a nida whenever there are other people around, even when she's not a nida. And maybe one of the reasons for this would be a sense of tznius, that other people would never know the difference. When they looked at you, they would never know if you're nida or not, because it's private, it's nobody's business. And one of the most practical expressions of that is not passing things to each other. As far as I can tell, there is no reason or source that we should dafka do that there's an inyan to keep the Harchakos always in front of other people. In fact, the truth is, if you think about it, it's not something you have to keep a secret. The fact that your wife maybe is a nida, maybe is not a nida, everyone already knows that. And also, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but just letting you know that most people are not that interested in your private life. Even though they seem to be looking at you and watching you, but they're busy with their own things. It used to be that women would dress a certain way when they were nida, and it was more kind of noticeable. Yes, when a woman goes to mikveh, that's very, very private. It's nobody's business. But the general sense, she may or may not be a nida. It's not something she has to publicize to the whole world. But she may tell a friend or family or whatever, somebody that she wants to talk to about it. It's not like a major embarrassing secret. Again, it's not something you have to announce. But if a husband and wife want to pass something to each other when she's not a nida, they could do that. It's just if a husband and wife feel for themselves, the two of them choose to say, whenever the other people are around, it's more comfortable for us and consistent for us to always act a certain way in front of other people, gesundheit. That has to be something that you both choose. Okay, so now we have a general introduction to what the Harchakos are all about. The Harchakos are basically two sections with a bunch of miscellaneous. Right, the first general section of the Harchakos is going to cover all different elements of touch and passing. So everything that has to do with negia, making sure that you're not touching each other or bumping into each other. So that's going to cover a whole bunch of different pieces. And then there's the eating section, where we talk all about food and different things you do for each other, and then a couple of other things. So with regards to touching and passing, some of this is we already know. You're not allowed to touch each other. But the Harchakos take it a little bit step further. So obviously there's no direct touch. There's no touching body to body, skin to skin, hand to hand. But even the other person's clothing. It means when you're wearing clothing, even if you're both wearing clothing, the clothing should not, the clothing that you're wearing should not bump into each other. So when you're walking together down the street and you have your gartel flying around, you want to do it in a way that you're not bumping into each other. So you don't want to have to walk miles and miles away. You can walk closer to each other, but you do it in a wise way so that you're not bumping into each other. Clothing are not bumping into each other. But also, there doesn't need to be in a way of anxiety. Right? There's a difference between a mindset of, hey, when I walk with my wife, I want to do it in a Yiddish way. As opposed to, when I walk with my wife, I'm very scared that I might do something wrong. Right? There's different approaches to it. I think that the approach of Ava is, at least longer term, healthier in a sense in terms of the relationship and the closeness and simcha that you have to have, the way to go, not just fear and anxiety, oy I might make a mistake. Because you want the time that you and your wife are spending together to be pleasant and comfortable. But we can still be aware of right and wrong. So even if you're holding something, even if you're holding a 10-foot pole, you can't touch your wife with it, you can't touch each other. And so, including throwing, rolling, anything like that, you cannot touch the other person with something in your hand or with your koyach, including blowing, let's say, dust off the other person's clothing or anything like that. So you don't interact with the other person with any kind of touch like that. And that includes also pulling or pushing together, or holding something up together. So like a long table, you can't move it around. You can't carry the same baby stroller up and down the stairs together. And it goes a step further than that. Whenever he or she are holding something, pulling it, pushing it, wearing it, then it also becomes part of them. So just like you're not going to touch your wife's hand, and you're not even going to drop something into her hand or throw something to her, just like you're not going to touch her clothing or drop something into her pockets, you're also not going to put something into a shopping cart while she's pushing the shopping cart. While she's pushing the shopping cart, it's an extended part of her hand. You don't put anything in and out of the shopping cart. If she's holding a baby on her lap, you're not going to tickle the baby or feed the baby. On the other hand, if you're both touching the same object, but that object is standing on its own 2 feet, so to speak, then there's no problem. So you can both touch the same table, as long as it's not going to, shake it up too much. You can touch a chair that your wife is sitting on. If your wife is in the bed and you want to put something down on the bed, so the blanket, if she's under the blanket is considered a beged, it's clothing, so that you can't touch. But if she moves the blanket over and you want to put the baby or something down on the bed and your hands are touching the sheets, touching the bed, that's not a problem. Because she's not holding the bed up in the air or moving the bed around, it's not part of her, she's just on it. You're both on the same thing. So therefore, to walk with a child, with each one of you holding on to one hand, if a child is able to walk on his or her own, and each one of you is holding a hand, many places can say that that's fine. That's not a problem. Because again, but to lift the child up in the air, that would be more of an issue. So therefore, there's no way to get something from you to her, from her to you, whether it's a baby, whether it's a phone, whether it's a key or something like that. It has to be put down or passed through someone else. It becomes very convenient to have children around, or you can pass something through each other. So you can't throw it or drop it or pass it in any way. And so let's say you have a baby with you, so you have the stroller, you put the baby down in the stroller, pick the baby up, put the baby down on the couch, or anything else like that. In terms of flame, so Havdalah candle, it's okay. In general, we don't want to be blowing air onto each other or heat or cold or anything like that, but the Havdalah candle, it's okay. Just remember that while she's holding the Havdalah candle, you can't pour wine onto it, because since it's in her hand, you can't put anything on it. So it might be more convenient to simply have a stand. So I just want to say one point, and that is there are certain situations of B'shas Adchak where certain things might be okay. For example, holding a baby together in order to be able to give the baby medication, where one of you has to hold the baby down and the other one will put the medication in. So in a case of Shas Adchak, where there's mamish, nobody else around, there's no people there to help, Rabbi Farkash says that you can do that if there's no other option. Because holding an object or something together from opposite ends, if you're not going to be bumping into each other, touching each other, some places can say that that's okay. In terms of carrying a stroller, so some people say it's okay, but there are many poskim that are very, very machmir. They say even b'shas adchak you shouldn't do it. I believe Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was very strict about it. And so what you really need to do is do some planning. Let's say you're at a chasana and your wife needs to take the key from you and you're standing outside and there's nowhere to put it down. Or if you end up at the bottom of the stairs and you have to carry a stroller upstairs, what are you going to do? There's no elevator or this and that. So a little bit of planning can make things work out, and you figure it out to not get into that situation. And this way you make sure that you're not touching each other or holding things together or anything else like that. So let's talk about eating and drinking, which is something that we do all the time. But when a husband and wife are living together and they want to eat and drink together, so there are certain harchakos that come up about that. First we're going to talk about what you need to do whenever you're eating and drinking together, and then we'll talk about what you have to be careful of or things that you may have to do a little differently. So, there's something called a heker. Those of you who learned smicha, learned basu b'chalav, you might recall in Simin Peiches, where it talks about one person eating fleishik, one person eating milchik on the same table. That being that you're both on the same table, there has to be some kind of heker, some kind of reminder, so that you don't eat from each other's food. One of you is eating milchik, one of you is eating fleishik. And so the same thing is for a husband and wife, and you're married. Every time you're eating or drinking anything, if you're both eating or drinking at the same table, from the same table, then there needs to be a type of a heker. So there's two types of heker. One type of heker is where you make some kind of division on the table that makes it as if you're not eating on the same table. For example, one of you is eating from the tablecloth, on the tablecloth, and one of you is off the tablecloth. Or one of you folds the tablecloth, so you're eating on a second layer of a tablecloth. Another example of this idea would be, let's say you have a placemat. One of you is on the placemat, one of you is off the placemat. Or even if it's, both have a placemat, but it's not usually that way. So the plate is put on the table in such a way that it's clear that it's kind of like a different section of the table, or that you're not eating really off the same table, so to speak. One practical way of doing this is if you put a napkin or a tissue underneath one of the plates. And this is something you could even do when you're in someone else's house for Shabbos. Of course, you still need to have a heker, but also it could be more in a discreet way. You don't need other people to see. You could put a napkin or a tissue underneath the plate, and as long as both of you see it, it could be sticking out just a little bit, and therefore it's as if one of you is eating off a plate which is on a tissue, and the other one is, or napkin, the other one is eating off a plate that's directly on the table. So that's one style of heker. Another style of heker is to designate something on the table, that this thing on the table serves as a heker, serves as a reminder. And both of you need to know what it is, and it needs to be placed on the table in such a way that you can both notice it every time you look towards each other. So, there's a lot of things on the table. What can you designate as a heker? So first of all, it needs to be something that has a little bit of height. Maybe a tefach, maybe even a little bit less, but something that stands out, like a challah roll, in terms of its minimal height. For example, it would be ideal not to use something like a fork or a key or something that's very, very flat and very low. It needs to stand out a little bit. It either has to be something which is unusually placed, which means either it's not usually on the table at all, or if it is on the table, it's not usually on the table now, or it's not usually on this part of the table. For example, the flowers. If the flowers are supposed to be in the middle of the table, then you move them into the wrong spot. Or if you never have candles during the day, you can put candles on the table. An example of that would also be, let's say you have a certain kind of tray that you usually keep your salt shakers on. Let's say people take sugar for their tea or something, they take it off of this tray, and you put the sugar dish off the table. You put it on off the tray. Put it directly on the table. It's not in its usual spot. So this object, which is out of place, that's one way that it can be a heker. Another way that an object could be a heker is when it's not out of place, when it's 100% normal for this. There's nothing different about this object being on the table. The difference is you're makbid not to use it during this meal. So if you and your wife, let's say, designate a bottle of water, say we're not going to drink, or a salt shaker, or a bowl of hummus, to say we're not eating from that, we're not partaking in that, or it's extra cups or something that you're not using. So designate it as something we are not going to use, and that itself makes it a heker. So based on these principles, let's give a couple of examples of what could you use as a heker. When you're home, the two of you alone, okay, fine, that's easy. But when you're in someone else's house for Shabbos, so then you have to be a little bit more creative. Now, if you're sitting far apart from each other, there's other people sitting between you, so it's still l'chatchila best to have a heker. If your mom is stuck, there's no way to find a heker, so then it's okay if you're further away from each other. But definitely when you're sitting next to each other, close enough that you can reach each other's plates, then you need to have a heker. It's also, by the way, only when you're at the same table. So if there's two tables together, even if you're sitting side by side, but it's nicker, that it's two different tables, that's also fine. So what would you use as a heker? For example, after Kiddush, you put the becher down, and you leave it there. Leave it on the table. It stays there during the meal. In some homes, you have somebody in the family goes around and takes everybody's becher and brings it to the kitchen. That will usually be the kids who aren't married yet, because once you're married, you know not to interfere with whatever's going on in people's section of the table. So a becher can qualify as a heker. Why not? If you're making hamaitzi, you have two challahs, leave one of them on the table. It doesn't work once the challah is cut, but if it's a whole challah, even if it's a small amount of challah, small challah roll, that could work as a heker. Again, earlier we said the napkin under the plate, that could also work. It's either or, any of the above. You can also designate a certain salt shaker, or a certain salad, bowl of hummus, a drink, a pile of cups. Anything else. Put a chitas down, a hat, a gartel kind of rolled up. Whatever it is, something that's on the table that is either not usually there, or you're both making sure not to use it. If someone takes away your heker, worst case scenario, you have no heker, so one of you can pause and not eat or drink until you've replaced it with something else. And it's, again, something that you become used to doing. So don't forget to place the heker. Unlike many of the other harchakos are easier to remember in a sense, because if you're going to, let's say you're going to be walking together, make sure not to touch each other. Right? But here it's when you're eating, it's not something to avoid, it's something to do. You have to make sure to actively put a heker, so it's something that gets getting used to. And it's something that's not grounds for leniency. Even if you feel uncomfortable, somebody will see, somebody will notice. So you try to do it in a discreet way, and as you said before, nobody's really paying attention, but still got to do it. Okay, now, in addition to having a heker, there are a couple of things we're going to talk about now, which is sharing food, eating each other's leftovers, and serving food to each other. Right? These are things that will explain what each of them are and practically what to do. But these are things that you can still do. You can still share food and eat each other's leftovers and serve each other food, but during neither time, they have to be done in a different way. They have to be done with a bit of a shinui. You have to be creative. So when it comes to sharing the same food, we cannot share the same food out of the same plate. So if the food is in any kind of container, something that holds it, whether it's a bag or a bowl or a plate or a cup or a bottle of sorts, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it's a serving dish or an individual dish, you cannot both take the food directly out of the container and eat it like that, both of you, even if other people are sharing with you. So if everybody together is standing and eating a pie of pizza off the same table, well, it doesn't matter really. It's the same table, not the same table. It's the sharing is the problem. So you can't both take a slice of pizza out of the box and take a bite. At least one of you has to be a mensch and put the pizza on your plate and then eat from the plate. So you can definitely share and both take pizza out of the same box, but first you have to separate it into separate containers. For example, your wife could eat out of the box and you could eat off your plate. Isn't that hate? If you want to have a little bit of your wife's drink, you can pour it into your cup. If she wants to take some chicken off of your plate, you can put it in her plate. If everybody's sitting around and taking popcorn out of a bowl, so you take a handful and put it down in front of you and eat it from there. A tray of sushi, you can't both take sushi out of the same container, off the same tray, but you can put some of that. You can put the sushi down on your tray, on your plate. You can put it down on her plate, etc. So you're not going to both eat directly out of the chips out of the same bag or eat off of the same tray, the same plate. But the same food can be shared by putting it first in different containers and then eating from there. Now, what happens when one of you has decided not to have any more? So when one of you is done, now if the other one continues to eat, that's not anymore considered sharing. You're not sharing the food. It's only one of you, not sharing anything. So therefore, there shouldn't be any issue. But the question is, are we dealing with leftovers? So obviously, if it's a serving dish, if it's a big tray of sushi, or if it's a pie of pizza, or if it's something else like that, and the other person has eaten some and now they're done, obviously that's not a concern of shirayim, of leftovers, because it wasn't the individual person's portion to begin with. Just because they ate off the tray doesn't mean it was their food. But what if we are talking about shirayim? What if we're talking about a plate or a cup of an individual portion of food? Let's say your wife was eating a sandwich or something else like that, or you were, and now you're done and there's leftovers shirayim and the other one wants to eat it. So over here we actually have a difference between the husband and the wife. A wife is allowed to eat her husband's leftovers. So while he's eating or drinking, she cannot drink straight out of his cup or eat straight out of his plate. But as soon as he's done, she can take his half-eaten sandwich, she can take his plate, eat the rest of his salad, drink the rest of his smoothie or coffee or whatever else it is. It's not a problem. A husband, on the other hand, should not eat his wife's leftovers except for certain conditions. So if he wants to eat the rest of the piece of cheesecake or drink the rest of her drink when she's done, there are a couple of ways that he's allowed to do it. Number one, when she's not present. So if you're really hungry and you want to eat the rest of your wife's salad, you can ask her to leave the room. I'm just kidding. Maybe more practically, a good example of this would be, let's say you come home, you go to your apartment, you go into the kitchen, open up the fridge, and you see there she's put away a sandwich or a salad in the same container she was eating from that container. Or she put her smoothie, drink or something in the fridge, and you want to know if you can drink from it or eat from it. It's your wife's shirayim. She's not eating it now, and she's not even there. It could be in the house, but she's not in the kitchen. She doesn't see you doing it. Then you can go ahead and eat it. And by the way, if your wife does see you starting to eat her leftovers, then if you know that it's her leftovers, but you didn't remember, you didn't know that she's a nida, then she has to stop you. She has to tell you. On the other hand, if you know that she's nida, but you had no idea that she had any of it, you don't know that it's her leftovers, then she doesn't have to stop you. She doesn't have to tell you. But when she's not in the room, you can eat her leftovers. A second possibility is we take it out of her plate. So once you've moved it into a new plate, any Yiddish mother knows this, once you've moved it into a new plate, it's a brand new dish. It's not leftovers anymore. So if you take it into your own plate, by the way, even if you put it back, but if it's been moved from the original plate that it was eaten from, or the drink was taken out from the cup and put into a new cup, then you can have it. A third option is if somebody else had in between. So if you call over one of the kinderlach and tell them to drink some of mommy's milkshake, and what's left over afterwards is your child's shirayim. It's no longer her shirayim. Then you can have it. So what are the three ways that you can have her leftovers? So first of all, it's limited to something that was her portion to begin with, right? If she ate from a serving dish, that's not a problem. But if it was her individual portion, you can have her leftovers if either she's not present, or you moved it into a different container first, or if someone else ate in between. So basically, in summary, it's like this. If you're eating both out of the same container, even if you're not chewing and swallowing at the same time, but let's say you're having some, and then you're speaking for a little while, and then you're having some more, meaning, are you done or are you not done? So to go alternately and both eat out of the same container is the same isser for both husband and wife. There's no difference. And it doesn't matter if the other one stepped out of the room or not. And it doesn't matter if other people are also eating in between. However, when it comes to shirayim, meaning that only one person is eating now, the other person is completely finished, so that's only something the husband can't do. He can't have his wife's shirayim, and he can have it if she's not there, and he can have it if someone else ate in between. Now, it doesn't help to add more liquid to the drink, for example. Let's say she left over half a cup of juice. You add some more juice, that's not going to help. On the other hand, you don't have to wash and clean out the cup. If she drank and finished the drink, even what most people call finished, even if there's a little bit of drops and the cup is a little bit of wetness, we're not worried about that. Also, tasting to see if it's spicy or salty, whatever, just tasting the food does not make it leftovers. And as we said earlier, if you're unaware, then that's okay. So what's the summary of all the halachos that have to do with food? Whenever you're eating together or drinking together on the same table, there needs to be a heker. Don't eat out of the same plate. And husband shouldn't eat his wife's leftovers. And then later on comes the other element that has to do with food, which is serving food and drink to each other, which we'll get to later. But for now, I just want to give an example or a situation where this can come into play. Let's say you have a bunch of people together sitting around the table, and maybe in this family or in this group of people, they have this interesting minhag that everybody sticks their fork in everybody else's plates, and they eat. They share each other's food. We're not talking about serving dishes. We're talking about individual portions. Everyone's trying the other person's soup and the other person's sushi and the other person's pasta, and they're all eating all out of the same plates together. Everyone's sticking the fork in the other person's plate. So if a husband and a wife, and she's a nida, are in that situation, in that scenario, and they both wanted to partake and have fun, how would they do that? And so there's really two options, two possibilities. One possibility is, let's say each person around the table is consistently and constantly eating all the food. So really what's going on in this scenario is everybody's sharing. Everyone's sharing everyone else's food. So if it's a sharing scenario, that means the husband's going to have some of this and then some of that and then have some more of that and keep eating everything all together, and the wife the same. Then there's really only one eitzah. They can't both do it. One of them is going to have to put each food that they want to have into their own plate first and then eat it from there. However, what if it's a different scenario? What if each person takes one turn with each plate? It's like they pass it around. You take a plate, you eat some, then you pass it to the next person, and they eat some, then you pass it to the next person. In that case, instead of sharing the food, what's actually happening is each person is eating the previous person's leftovers. You're eating food and you're leaving your shirayim to the next person. In that case, besides for that same option that we just said, that you could put it into your own plate, that also still works. As long as you're putting it in your own plate, You could eat from the same plate your wife ate from. But there are additional things that you could do now to mamish be like everybody else and to not have to use a separate plate. And that is, of course, if your wife is not in the room momentarily. But besides that, what if you go first? What if every time you and your wife both want to try the same food out of the same plate, first you eat and then you finish and then you put it down and then your wife takes it from you and she has it. Or the same thing if you're in the car and you have a Snapple and you're too cheap to buy 2 bottles, so you have one and you want to share it. So you drink and then you're done, you put it down and your wife can have after you, she can have your shirayim. Another option is, if your wife tries it before you, is that make sure you give it to your shvaga or one of your kids or something like that, and they try it before you as well. So instead of eating your wife's leftovers, you're eating the other person's leftovers. Another point to think about. What happens if a husband and wife go to a restaurant together? Right, so what are some of the things to think about? Right, so thinking about the seats, sitting together, if it's a type of a soft bench, being careful about that. If it's a very shaky table, both of you leaning on the table, but also when they bring the food. If you're only going to have one food to share, making sure that you're not sharing directly out of the same dish, having the hecker, eating her leftovers. We didn't talk about it yet, but the serving each other, and the issur of the husband ordering for his wife specifically a chash of a drink. So there's a lot of different things to consider. One approach is to say it's too overwhelming, it's too much, forget about it, we can't do this. But a different approach maybe is, hey, this is a challenge, let's learn the halachos and let's get into the scenario and let's see what we can do to try to implement all of the halachos.